Welcome to A Line Through Time, where I take the time to look through your favourite franchises and work out how it all lines up. Been a while since I discussed this shared universe timeline proper, eh? I'll be assuming you've already seen the original episode on the DOA/Ninja Gaiden timeline, and then the episode that confirmed Nioh to also be set in the same universe. Now that we're all caught up, let's get to it. There are a few details that need to be addressed before we can proceed with the newer releases. First is a statement from the first video. In it, I said that I'd heard Tomonobu Itagaki left Tecmo over accusations of sexual harassment. While those accusations were made, that was in 2006, 2 years before he left. The actual reasons he left were alleged unpaid bonuses and slanderous remarks made about him by the company's president. It's possible these two things have some connections, but I don't want to spread misinformation. The allegations, of which he was found innocent in 2007, were not the reason he left. Now, onto details from the canon. Nintendo Game Master on DeviantArt commented that Ninja Gaiden Shadow says 3 years since the last battle, seemingly suggesting it's a sequel to NES Gaiden 1, not a prequel. I checked and I see where the confusion can arise. The first text in the game says USA 1985 AD, it has been 3 years since the battle. What battle this refers to is unclear due to the horrendous translation. The intro ends with the line, Jacchio has not yet been awakened. I think what it's trying to say is that Shadow is set 3 years away from NES Gaiden 1 since that released in 1988 and Shadow released in 1991. The closing line explains that this game happens before Jacchio awakens in NES Gaiden 1, supported by the date of 1985, 3 years prior to 1988. Game translations back then were notoriously bad, so the localization team seemed to have misread and misrepresented whatever the Japanese script was saying, but no, this is definitely a prequel. I missed one detail from Nioh 1 that connected the game to the DOA NG timeline. Muramasa, the shopkeeper from Modern Gaiden and minor character in DOA 4 and 5, appears in Nioh as a blacksmith. Whether this is supposed to be his ancestor or perhaps even the man himself given how mysterious he is, it's hard to say. But either way, the setup for the shared universe was already in place before Bloodshed's End introduced Jin Hayabusa. Nioh 2 has since expanded on the connections. The Darkness in the Capital expansion introduced another Hayabusa ancestor in the Heian period's Ren Hayabusa, and also brought in the Black Spider Ninja clan, including Tsuchigumo, a boss based on the Rasetsu from Modern Gaiden 2. And then, the final unlockable mission in the recently released The First Samurai expansion is a boss fight against the very Nioh Tengu that was introduced in DOA 5 Ultimate. It's impossible to deny that this is a shared universe consisting of 3 separate series now. Well, I say 3. Another detail I overlooked in the past was in relation to the Ayane side story in Fatal Frame Maiden of Black Water. In the past, I concluded that the Ayane story was so disconnected from the main story, featuring only the same location and enemy types, that it simply took place in the DOA universe's version of Mount Hikami. However, I again overlooked a small detail. Tsumugi, the girl Ayane is sent to retrieve and who only appears in this chapter, is referenced in the main game. During the interlude between chapters 3 and 4, Yuri can find a photo of Tsumugi commenting that Tsumugi's parents had hired Hisoka to search for her, but then mysteriously called it off. This sets the stage for Ayane to set out to find her instead. What this means is that Fatal Frame is actually a part of the Dead or Alive /Ninja Gaiden /Nioh Team Ninja universe. That's right, incest ghost babies are now canon to Dead or Alive. Fuck. I mean, yes, it could just be an Akuma and Tekken 7 situation, but shut up, this is more fun. But before we get around to figuring out where these games fit in the timeline, let's discuss the new releases that have come out since the previous episodes. First, we have Dead or Alive 6. Naturally, it's set after DOA 5, and we can probably say it's post FF5 as well for now. But what about DOA X3? Well, Jailbait and Honkers, both featured prominently on the covers of all 3 versions of DOA X3, have not yet met by the time of DOA 6, and I struggle to accept that they never meet each other or any of the other prominent DOA girls they're unfamiliar with in DOA 6 while vacationing on Nuzak Island for 2 full weeks. Especially given that Honoka is known to be a big fan of Kasumi, so she'd definitely seek out the other fighters to get to know them. Yes, Warriors All-Stars has the 2 reference the island, while Ayane says she's glad she and Honoka aren't sisters, even though she learns they are in DOA 6, but the story makes so much more sense if we ignore the non-canon game by another studio and look at the canonical facts. Also, no one has aged since DOA 5, so it's set the same year. This game also seems to hold a key to the timeline, which we'll get to later. Dead or Alive Extreme Venus Vacation was a nightmare to try and understand. Thanks to contradictory information, it took me a long time to figure out if the game was a PC port of X3 or its own thing, and if the latter, if it had its own story. From what I can tell, despite reusing a lot of events and even some of the character endings, Venus Vacation is its own separate story taking place sometime after X3. And this game also leaves off half the DOA girls and instead fills its roster with shit tier OCs because the Japanese continue to have shit taste. Nioh 2, the only good and complete game Team Ninja's released since the last video, is part prequel, part sequel, part simultaneously both to Nioh 1. The bulk of the narrative takes place before the first game, spanning from 1555 to 1598. Then the first game takes place in 1600, its epilogue in 1603, Dragon of the North in 1613, Defiant Honor in 1614, and Bloodshed's End in 1615. Why it takes William 3 years to get back to England and then a further 10 to rush back to Japan, I have no idea. After this, Nioh 2's epilogue sees the new hero Hide team up with William in 1616. William has a son with Okatsu by this point who could only have been born after William returned 3 years prior, but this is the boy now. The timeline only really makes sense if you ignore Dragon of the North claiming to be set in 1613, and just imagine William lived in Oshu for a decade being visited by Okatsu a few years before the Toyotomi Uprising. From here, Hide's story continues into 3 time travel adventures in the expansions. The Tengu's disciple sees them entering the Heian period to fight alongside Minamoto no Yoshitsune in 1185. Darkness in the Capital goes further back to explore some of the game's backstory in 978. And the final expansion, The First Samurai, sees Hide teaming up with their own yokai mother and becoming the ideal for what a samurai is in 797. The in-game timeline seems uncertain about the time frame of the DLCs, but since Benkei dies and Yoshitsune is implied to be on his way out in the Tengu's disciple, it seems that Hide is actually around until their deaths 4 years later. However, given that the real Minamoto no Yorimitsu died in 1021 while the game version seems to die in 976, it's difficult to say that Hide stuck around that long. It's likely that the game just truncates events to suit its narrative purposes, which makes one wonder why the same wasn't done with Nioh 1 to make William's trips across the ocean seem as urgent as they're intended. After all, Taira no Kagekiyo dies shortly after Hide's arrival in 1185, and he didn't die in real life until 1196. Now we need to place these expansions in the timeline, both with the original events before Hide got involved and the version of events where Hide is involved. Sadly, how much time has passed between the epilogue and now for Hide is never specified. But at least there's no notable time alterations, so we don't need to delve into dumb alternate timeline bullshit, unless you want to headcanon that this creates a split timeline that leads to either classic or modern Ninja Gaiden somehow. Now, what was that key detail introduced in DOA 6? Well, right at the start of the story, Eleanor hands Jailbait a file on Honkers which is dated October 5th, 2018. This is actually just filler text because that page is the Koei Tecmo America press release for the October 5th, 2018 announcement of Bass, Tina and Mila being added to the DOA 6 roster. They didn't even remove reference to KT America from the text. Hell, even Honoka's notes are copied directly from the DOA 5 last round website. Evidently, some Japanese member of the art team just copy-pasted some English text into the texture file, which somewhat works for the Honoka page, but not for the rest. So, this raises the question, even if the text surrounding it is all filler, is the date still valid? Potentially. But the rest of the information on that page is suspect, so it's difficult to say. But even if we do accept it, all that changes from the previous iteration is that everything moves 2 years into the future. The issue with either of those is our newest addition to the timeline. If you've seen the Fatal Frame episode, you'll know that Fatal Frame 5 is set in 2006. This brings its placement between DOA 5 and 6 into question, but also does the same for Ayane's story being canon to the shared universe at all, since we estimate Ayane being 14 in either 2012 or 2014, making her either 8 or 6 when she goes after Tsumugi, and even with anime's unrealistic proportions, she's definitely in her late teens at least. Of course, it's also possible that Ayane's chapter is set years later and Tsumugi's been trapped in an unaging limbo state since, but Tsumugi's sister hired Ayane to find her, which you imagine would have been relatively soon after the search was called off by her neglectful parents. Additionally, ghosts of Mount Hikami compel people to kill themselves, and I think the mountain is exercised by Yori and Ren's actions in the main story, so Tsumugi and the ghosts shouldn't still be around by then. But there is a way to make this work, and that's to go back on something I said in the first video. I said that based on the advancement of technology, it made more sense to assume there was a sliding timescale and move everything into the future. However, if we undo that and base our time frame once more around one of the few definitive dates in the series, the 1999 setting of the Ninja Gaiden arcade game, everything in the timeline falls back 10 years, moving DOA 5 to 6 and FF5 to 2006. And now, it all lines up perfectly. And no, we can't use the dates for NES Gaiden and Shadow because that would move FF5 so far into the future as to place Ayane in her 30s there. I admit this could all be a case of confirmation bias on my part, and the existence of modern smartphones in 2006 is unusual, but so are flying cars and Sky City Tokyo in, by previous estimates, 2013. Some events in Fatal Frame still remain undated, which is a bit of a pain, but that's a small price to pay for the satisfaction of seeing everything else slide into place so cleanly. Except we hit one little snag after I'd already written and recorded this episode. I discovered, thanks to Drake Vagabond, that Maria and Rido's heart rate monitors in DOA 6 also have dates that go up to 2018. So it appears that the year is accurate. Fuck. So, rather than rewriting the episode and then re-recording and re-editing what I had so far, I decided to place this at the end so you guys can take the same journey of disappointment that I did. It does seem that the Ayane story really is just an Akuma and Tekken 7 situation, non-canon to her home series, but definitely canon to the series she's guesting in. The timeframes just don't line up at all, but Ayane's chapter is the resolution to a plot thread left hanging in the main story, so it has to be canon to that game. Who knows, maybe this is the Ayane from the Itagaki timeline that was replaced by Dimensions, and then put back because the story recap on DOA 6's website describes Genra's transformation into Omega as it was in DOA 3 pre-retcons. Suck it, Dimensions, you Twindale tier fuck. The best we can probably conclude is that Ayane's chapter is canon to DOA, just set much later, but that does feel like a stretch. Unless it is canon and Fatal Frame is what's subject to a sliding timescale. If we approach this that way, each story moves up around 12 years, placing Fatal Frame 4 in 1992, 1 in 1998, 2 and 3 in 2000, and 5 in 2018. So I'm left with a conundrum. Do we assume Fatal Frame's time frame, has been retconned to come later so it can coincide with DOA 6's 2018 date, or do we assume that Fatal Frame is a separate universe with a separate version of Ayane, similar to her appearances in Warriors titles? Maybe the Itagaki DOAs, Warriors Odyssey 3, Warriors All-Stars, and Fatal Frame 5 all feature Ayane from Earth 2. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. Either way, I think it's fun to imagine the Spirit Stone flashlight is powered by Nioh Spirit Stone's Amrita. No, Hide, stop, we need that flashlight! If you liked this video, why not subscribe and support me on Patreon like these fine people here? If not, then make sure to share it with your enemies so they can suffer along with you. Today's recommended video is Guardian Spirits in Dead or Alive Night Parade by Drake Vagabond, partly because he helped me discover that DOA 6 is set in 2018, and also because I want to bully him into continuing the Night Parade series now that Nioh as a series is apparently over.